Hi, everyone, and welcome and good evening. My name is Benjamin Quinn, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I'm honored to introduce this virtual event with Leonard Mlodinow, presenting his book, Emotional, How Feelings Shape Our Thinking, in conversation with NICK OWCHAR. I hope you're all well and safe. Thank you for joining us virtually. Tonight's event is the latest installment in our Harvard Science Book Talk series, which works to bring the authors of recently published science literature to our Cambridge community and beyond. Coming up in the series on Wednesday, February 10th, we'll host celebrated theoretical physicist Michael Dine for his new book, This Way to the Universe, A Journey into Physics. To learn more about this and our upcoming virtual events, you can visit harvard.com and sign up for our email newsletter, or check out the page harvard.com/science for more info. I'll also be posting a link to our Science Research Public Lectures YouTube channel in the chat, where you can view previous talks you might have missed. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our authors at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase Emotional on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you to our partners at Harvard University, and thank you all for showing up and tuning in support of authors, publishers, indie bookselling, and especially for science. And finally, as you have no doubt experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. If they do, we will do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. Thank you so much for your patience and understanding. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Leonard Mlodinow received his PhD in theoretical physics from the University of California, Berkeley. Previously, he was an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow at the Max Planck Institute and was on the faculty of the California Institute of Technology. An award-winning science writer, his previous books include A Briefer History of Time, Subliminal, which was the winner of the Penn E. O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award, The Drunkard's Walk, and Elastic. Tonight, he is joined in conversation by NICK OWCHAR, a writer, editor, and executive director of advancement communications at Claremont Graduate University. Previously, he was deputy book editor at the Los Angeles Times and regularly contributes to the Los Angeles Review of Books. This evening, Leonard and Nick have joined us for a discussion of Leonard's latest, Emotional, How Feelings Shape Our Thinking, a captivating plunge into the science of emotion, which Charles Duhigg calls beautifully written and full of cutting-edge research. This book is a crucial reminder of the power feelings have in our thinking. Much of the discourse surrounding emotions is plagued with hard-to-answer questions. How can one connect better with others? How can one make better sense of conflicted feelings like frustration, fear, and anxiety? Ushering us from the labs of pioneering emotion scientists to real-life scenarios, Emotional shows us how our emotions are essential parts of who we are, guiding our decision-making and allowing us to have a stronger connection to the world around us. We are so thrilled to be hosting this event tonight. Without further ado, I am delighted to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is all yours, Leonard and Nick.
Thanks, Benjamin. Appreciate it very much.
Hey, Nick.
Hey, Len. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well too. Good to see you. And
You too.
thanks to everybody for for joining us tonight. This is really a pleasure. So, as Benjamin said in his intro of us, so a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was the deputy editor of the book section at the LA Times, and that's how I came to be aware of Len's work for all of you out there. I just kept seeing these books rolling in with his name on it and him getting all these outstanding reviews. And I just thought, who is this guy? You know, what is going on? And as Benjamin said, you know, Len has been trained as a physicist. He counts many of the field's heavyweights as his colleagues and friends, people like Richard Feynman and Stephen Hawking among them. But to say he's been following a traditional route as a physicist or a traditional academic path would be totally wrong. Sure, he's taught at Caltech for a number of years. Sure, Len is still a practicing physicist. Hey, Len, I hope you don't mind this long windup I'm doing right now. He's been a practicing physicist. He's regularly published, but he's also written for television for many years that people might not realize. And when you read his books, you realize he's got a voice and a style that's totally all his own, and it's garnered him such a terrific international following. So it's really my pleasure to be here with you tonight, Len. Thanks for thinking of me and inviting me to do this.
Well, thanks, Nick. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm turning red.
Oh, really? I can't tell.
Yeah, it's good.
How's
I have
it
to
going?
control my emotions right now, really.
Yeah. Try to take the emotion out of it, right? Isn't that what
Yeah.
it talks about? How's it going? How's the Zoom tour been going? Have you had a chance to do any in-person events, or maybe something in the fall when things lightened up a little bit?
No, it's all been started really early this time, earlier than the in-person events ever started. It started in December, even though the book came out January 11th, and it's quite a few stops on the tour. But I guess the publisher doesn't mind sending you everywhere when they don't have to pay plane fare, hotels. It's like, oh yeah. So it's okay. It's fun. I enjoy talking about the book and the topic.
Yeah, and we have it looks like we have a terrific group of participants tonight, and and throughout this discussion, I'll keep checking the Q&A section to see if there are any questions that I can pitch your way. I wanted to start off simply with talking about the timing of the new book. So in my old world of writing book reviews, it was almost a throwaway line to sometimes say that a book was like perfectly timed. A new politics book would come out and you say, oh, it's just couldn't be better timed for the situation. Or there was a self-help or a history book that was talking about some particular issue that was kind of hot, and you'd say, oh, it's perfectly timed. Kind of ended up sounding like filler, But when I talk about your book as being perfectly timed, that is hardly a throwaway. It's no exaggeration. The years 2020 and 2021 were total pressure cookers, pure emotion. You saw hatred, anger, and fear everywhere. How did you cope with it? Did you find yourself getting caught up in all the craziness of those 2 years?
Well, of course, I'm human, and I did. Well, I coped with it. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was not only to learn how the mind works and how emotions inform your thoughts and your decisions, but to learn for myself how I work and how that would work. And so it was nice writing the book and having my consciousness raised about how my brain works, to be able to reflect on what I'm feeling and why, and how I feel about other people and the events that are happening, and learning to use some of the emotion regulation tools I talk about in the book to regulate my own emotions when they got out of hand. Because I don't want to start by talking about emotions getting out of hand. I want to say that emotions are not only a constructive and important tool in all of our reasoning and our thinking, but they're inextricable from our logical reasoning. We can't get away from them, and they help us daily, many times, as we to guide us, even to make us get out of bed in the morning. So we need our emotions. But just like your eyes experience sometimes optical illusions and mirages and so on, your emotions sometimes get out of hand. They can be, sometimes you react too strongly to a situation, or the emotions have a quality called persistence, which means that they don't come and go immediately. They linger for a while, and sometimes they linger too long. You're in a situation where the emotion is appropriate. You go to another situation where that emotion is irrelevant to that new situation, and yet it lingers. And since our emotions evolved when we were living in the wild, and we live in such a hugely different society today, these things can happen. But for the great predominance, I just want to emphasize, of our living, the emotions are playing a very constructive role. But it was and they've helped me get through these years too, because it's been a tough time, and I think for all of us.
So you said you had some practices that you used. So what are some of the things that you learned to use to handle your emotions during this overheated time?
Well, one that I'm sure we all use, probably. Sorry.
Meditation, stuff like that, right?
Well, yeah, and expression. So expression is talking about or verbalizing your emotions. men in our society, in the Western society, at least in my generation and before, were taught to suppress your emotions and not show them, and men don't cry, and quote, overcome your emotions. And we were taught that females were somehow lesser because they were called more emotional, but really they were more in touch with their emotions. We're all emotional. That doesn't work though. Suppressing emotions doesn't work, and it leads to bad outcomes, and it leads to actually shorter lifespan. So that's one I don't use. But expression is one that I've used and learned, especially learning about the research about how well it works. I've come to use it more. But I remember I had a brief stint. I've done a lot of things, Nick, and I had a brief stint in the corporate world, and I would get mad at some people that I had to interact with and work with, and I would write what we called in the corporate world a flame email, right? So and I would do that. I learned not to send it. I would put it in drafts and look at it the next day, and just the writing of that email was enough to diffuse my feelings. And same thing if you could go home and talk to your partner, your wife, your husband, a loved one, your parents, whoever, your friends. And just the act of expressing your emotion tends to diffuse it. So that's one. And there's fascinating studies, which I a little bit long to get into, but of social media and what happens in people's social media streams, which computers can now analyze, and what happens to the emotional content after they express emotion. So we now know that this really works. Mm-hmm. And one other I'll mention, I don't want to filibuster, but I'll just mention one other one since you asked, which is reappraisals of one I use a lot. I like it since I live in LA, I drive a lot, and in LA, the drivers are very aggressive. So sometimes something happens that angers you. Like for instance, you're cut off. It happens quite often. You're on the highway and you're cut off by somebody, and we tend to get angry. And what are we really angry about? If you think about it, my car falls back 20 feet and everything's the same as it was before. So nothing's really changed. It hasn't done anything, but you have a story in your head perhaps about that person, that they're not respecting you. They're being a hog. They care only about themselves, things that you project onto them. And so you have anger, and when your brain forms an emotion, that's what it's doing. It's taking in the sensory input and its knowledge of the current context, and it's creating an emotional experience that evolutionarily over time has been developed to help us in certain kinds of situations. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I don't think it's a useful one, because there's no call to action really that you want to do, and there's no goal that really has been stood in the way that you have to overcome something to get to your goal. You're just moving back 20 feet. So what that way your brain constructs the experience of emotion is called appraisal. Reappraisal means to try and move that over somewhere. So what I'll tell myself is that person is probably in a big hurry. Who knows what's going on? The person's probably stressed out. Who knows what's happening? Something emergency, or just late for a meeting, or I don't know what. And so that's why. And then if that's the story I tell, I don't feel the anger. Or I might tell myself the person's just oblivious and didn't even realize they cut me off, which I have to say I can be guilty of too. So I really understand that one. So I don't get angry at that person either. So what you do is you take the situation and you try to consciously use your executive function in your cortex to find another story that's not the one that makes you angry. Put a different spin on it. Now it's important that you don't, when you try that, you don't just make up something that you don't believe. You have to find something, you have to look at what else is plausible, that's something else that you can believe. And just thinking about that and finding another spin for it can diffuse your emotion. So those are a couple of the methods that I use.
I mean, that's fascinating. So we tell ourselves stories throughout the day. So what you're saying is you tell yourself an alternative story that's going to tamp down on those emotions. Whenever a car cuts me off, I always tell my sons or something, I go, that person's probably got to rush home to go use the bathroom.
There you go. Yeah.
You feel better. So there's that typical saying, and I think you engage it in the book, where people will say, okay, you're in a situation and there's a chance that you're going to get really emotional, and you just got to take the emotion out of it. You got to keep cool and just remove the emotion. But the way that you talk about it, it doesn't sound like you can't really separate one from the other, can you?
No, so you don't have an emotional brain and a rational brain. We might speak of it that way, but it's metaphorical. It's not in any way physical or the way it's really working. The emotional and logical processing that happens in your brain are inseparable. And there's no such thing. Even if you think you're applying cold reason, you're not.
Yeah.
So how does it work? Well, your brain is an information processor. It's not really an information processor like a computer, although it's more similar to computers as they're being used just in the last few years with neural network programming and deep learning. It's something along those lines, which we can talk about later if you want. But it's also not that. It's so much more complex than that. But it's not a linear machine that takes in data and says if A and then B, and you just go through and you make a recipe as a programmer, and the compute and your brain executes it. It's much more complicated, but it is processing information. So what it is doing is taking in data, and it's trying to answer questions. And there's a logical, rational part of your brain. There's a logical, rational capability in your brain. Your brain knows that if A implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. So there is this logical, rational processing that can go on in your brain. But that doesn't go on in a vacuum. So who chooses the question you're going to answer and whether it's important? Your emotions. Who chooses which data, which sensory data you're going to pay attention to in any given situation? Your emotions. Who chooses the memories that you bring up and the associations you make as you think about this, or the goals that you're going toward? That's all very strongly tied to emotions and your unconscious processes that go on. So in any what emotion is a functional, they call it a functional state of the brain. It's a mode of process. Each emotion represents a different mode of processing in which each data will be evaluated differently, questions will be evaluated differently, probabilities and risks will be rated differently according to hopefully the situation that makes it appropriate, that your emotions have evolved in a way to tune all those processes in a way that you make the best decision and that ask the best questions and have the best goals and bring up the best information from your memory in a way that suits that situation. Let me just give one example to make it a little clearer. I like to give an example. Well, I'll give two. A quick one from everyday life. You're walking down the street and you're suddenly, let's say we're downtown LA, parts of it are pretty seedy, right, Nick? And
a little bit,
and suddenly you're afraid. Well, what you're afraid, a twig breaking a block away might suddenly enter your consciousness. That same auditory data would have entered your consciousness whether you were afraid or not. But when you're not in a fear mode, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. It's something that you have so much sensory data is constantly coming into your brain that we can't handle it on our conscious level. So our unconscious manages it. It's like when you're at a cocktail party and I'm talking to you and I don't hear, the rest is just a din, kind of a random noise until someone mentions my name, in which case my unconscious also goes, whoop, this is maybe important, pops it into consciousness. And I notice that, which proves that I've been kind of hearing it all along, but I haven't been attending to it. My conscious mind hasn't been aware of it. So that's what happens when you walk down the street. And so when you're walking down a normal street and you're not in a fear mode of processing, that doesn't register. But when you are in a fear mode, then that twig from a block away registers, because the mode that your brain is working in when you're in fear is accentuates your sensory input and has you pay attention to more things. It's all happening on an unconscious level. You're not deciding this, it just happens. Things like hunger as a goal, maybe I'm walking to a restaurant, they'll suddenly be lowered in their value and their how much I attend to that. I won't even feel hungry anymore. If I have a headache, I might not feel that. It's all being everything in your brain, all those parameters are being reshuffled to suit a fear situation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the laboratory study I wanted to mention was in disgust, because this is interesting. It's not like the everyday real world situations that I just described. This is a very specific laboratory situation. It's a bit artificial, but it also is very sharply illustrative of what happens. So when you're in disgust, scientists have found that kind of mode of processing has to do with increased propensity and desire to dispel things. So it's not just that I taste something and it tastes off and I'm disgusted and I spit it out. That's true for eating, but in general, it puts your brain in a processing mode in which you value your possessions less and want to get rid of things. And so it's kind of interesting that they did this study of students, and they put half of them in a disgust mode by spraying fart spray in the room before they brought them in.
Fart spray.
Fart spray, yeah. Actually, it's
I
interesting.
don't know how they made that.
They first tried, if any of you are students out there, they first tried to discuss them by having dirty, empty pizza boxes and leftover rotting food on the table and half drinking milkshakes drying up and stuff on the floors. And that experiment failed because they were not able to induce disgust, because that's the way the dorm rooms are anyway, or their homes, their student housing. So they did the experiment again with fart spray. So that disgusted them. The other group, they didn't have them do anything. And then after they gathered them together, they had them each do some bogus activity that was supposedly the purpose of the experiment, but it wasn't really, but it was just to pretend for the researchers to have them think that was the purpose. And then when they were on their way out, the researchers went up to each one and offered to buy back a pen that they had given them at the start of this whole thing. So that was really the point of the experiment, but they didn't want the students to suspect that. And the idea was that they all looking at the same pen, they look at the brand, they have the feel of it, they get some economic evaluation of what that pen is worth, right?
Yeah.
But if they're in a disgust state and they're supposedly, according to the theory, they're devaluing their own possessions and they're in a more dispel mode, you would think they would ask less money for it than the control group that wasn't in a disgust mode. And sure enough, that's what happened. I think the average was something like $2.50 from the disgust group and $4.50 from the control group. Mm-hmm. So this just shows you how an emotion affects the whole framework of your mental calculations.
So it isn't one of the questioners, Rafael Gonzalez, asked a question about, do emotions influence thought, or does thought influence emotion? It's all
they go together, right? Right. So they are inseparable.
What's that?
Because let's just think about it for a second. Suppose I have a robot, and I wrote for Star Trek, as you know, The Next Generation, and we had our robot Data.
Plan on talking about that.
All right, we can talk about that later. But Data supposedly had no emotions. Data was pure logic, and I'm glad that when I was writing that for that show, that I didn't realize what I do now, because I go, wait a minute, why would Data ever do anything? Think about it. Why would Data even ever do anything? You're talking about thought versus emotion. Why would Data even start thinking about something? What motivates you to start thinking about something? Desires, a joy, fear, anxiety, whatever, some feeling. So if Data had no emotions, and Data could be programmed with a set of rules. If Picard comes into the room, stand up and salute or whatever, right? If there's a fire, try to put it out or leave. You could have an encyclopedia of rules, of stimuli, possible stimuli that maybe nature would develop over a million years, and nature would make you a dictionary and put it in your brain, and an encyclopedia of responses. If this happens, do that. If this happens, do that. And you could live by that. And a lot of non-human animals with simpler brains do kind of live by such rules. Right. But if you don't have, but if you had such rules and Data was sitting at a desk, and none of those triggers happen, Data would just remain sitting there and not even initiate anything. And if something happened that was new, a new situation that nature or the programmer hadn't foreseen, or a situation was a variation of a situation, Data wouldn't know how to do that either. So instead, we have emotions, which are an extra layer, which are much more general. They're not triggered by such specific things. They're triggered by a much more general universe of things that happen, and they trigger this state of being, and then your mind calculates. It uses the input of the emotion and the knowledge of the situation, your beliefs, your rational thinking, and it does thinking and thoughts, and it generates thoughts and action. So that's how that works. So you can't separate the emotion from the logical processing. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So another question from someone on this session, Monique, she asked about for you to explain a little more about emotion suppression and shortening the lifespan. And that is that tied to the idea of stress killing people?
Right, that's exactly. So what suppression, so psychologists have studied how people cope with certain situations, and the lowest on the totem pole in terms of success is suppression. And they have also found that what happens when you do suppress emotions regularly and habitually is that you end up with higher levels of cortisol, a hormone from stress. And when they look at people, they find correlations between a lifespan and the practice of emotional suppression. And they understand that because if you look at it physiologically, suppression is related to cortisol, and that's related to stress. That's a stress hormone that is not good for your body to have on elevated levels on a regular basis.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. I looked at your book as well, just to see what it said about social media. And, I was thinking of what we've gone through the past couple of years. And you talk a little bit about Facebook and the effect of positive posts versus negative. And you used a really powerful term that I think everybody's been affected by. You used the term emotional contagion. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and what was going on with social media and how that affected our emotions as well.
Well, so humans in the wild couldn't survive on their own. So we banded together in groups of 20, 30, 40, 50 individuals. And I'm talking about when we were nomads on the prairie or the African savanna. Yeah. And that's how we survived. As primates, we're not the strongest, the fastest, or anything, even able to survive just on our own. But when we cooperate, we can catch prey, we can accomplish things, build shelter, and become able to survive all the trials and tribulations of raw nature. Right. So because of that, we had to evolve ways of cooperating with each other, even before language. And certainly before written language and before culture, we had to find ways of understanding what each person wanted, of communicating your thoughts to the next person in a way to smooth out the operation, and also we needed to learn to help other people, to desire to help other people. So we developed social emotions, and we have empathy. We have guilt for when we did something that violates social norms that harms somebody, or shame when other people are looking at us and going, "You did something to harm somebody." We cooperated with each other, and this emotional contagion has to do with that. It's a way of saying this: if your sadness is my sadness, Nick, so I'm going to help you if you're in trouble, and you'll help me when I'm in trouble, and that's how we all survive. So today we still have that aspect of our beings, which is an emotional contagion. That I like to point out. My favorite example of that is the laugh track on comedies, or sometimes, like, I don't know if you ever watched the late night comics, like Colbert and so forth. And I used to watch them sometimes and think that they were funny. And then when COVID hit and they didn't have an audience and there was no laughter behind them, I'm going, are these jokes just not funny anymore? Or is it that I only laughed because other people were laughing, and there's something to that. And we all tend to share that. It's like when one person yawns, you all yawn. It's that kind of thing. And so what has happened, though, in modern society, we are in touch with so many more people than we were ever in touch with when we were evolving over the many, millions of years that we were evolving. We may have lived in a situation with a family and a group of maybe dozens of people, but we probably interacted with only interacted with only a subset of that, a dozen or two people in any given day. And today, what happens today? Well, we have, of course, first television and the cable media that we get input from many other people, but with the social media and the internet now, that goes both ways. Now we communicate, they communicate, we're in touch. Many people are in touch with thousands and thousands of people every day. And it's really not natural in the sense that we didn't grow up, as a species, we didn't grow up that way. And we're not necessarily armed or equipped for that. No. So when now emotional contagion, when it works on that scale, can really be strong and get out of hand. So, and hate and anger and sometimes fear, going through that massive social media and reaching many other people can magnify and amplify in a way that isn't necessarily healthy for society. And yet people can also use that to attract eyeballs to their whatever TV show or website, because that excites people. And so it becomes a bit of an issue in modern society, I think. And there have been studies of social media that illustrate the contagion. You can see they have really interesting computer programs that analyze the emotional content of texts. So they can go through millions of Twitter texts or streams, hundreds of thousands of users of their streams, and analyze the emotion. They can study what's happening, and they can see when they do these studies that they can see the spread of emotion just by analyzing how getting some Twitter or Facebook feeds with certain emotion alters the people who have read that to make tweets and along the same lines. So
sure. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think on the evolutionary scale, I don't think the human being is really prepared for the intensity that social media has provided, over the past 20 years. I was thinking of your description of emotional contagion. I remember it must have been right at the beginning of the pandemic. I posted something on my Facebook, and I posted about this Catholic monk, because that's my own background, the Catholicism, and he posted this thing about how beautiful it was to walk into a Hindu temple and see all the people in prayer. And he said something like, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all found common ground, that we share in something in order to advance, as a people. And I thought, oh, that's so lovely. I'm going to share that on social media. So I did, and I got a few likes, and then somebody flamed out on me and wrote like a 300-word reply where they said, how can you support these primitive religions? And I was like, whoa.
Oh.
And it was awful. And it was, I mean, like you said, it's this emotional contagion, but it's in reverse. It's like people aren't growing together. It's like they're pulling apart. Don't you think?
Well, what depending on the emotion, happiness can be a contagion too. In fact, there's a very interesting study, a longitudinal study, long-term study over decades of a network of people. And what happens, it's a large group of people, and they follow them, and they studied their happiness in life and also their connectivity to other people. And they found that people who were socially connected to other happy people tended to have greater happiness. Now you have to be careful there, because I understand there's a difference between correlation and causation. And they took that, they analyzed that carefully. It wasn't just all the happy people banded together. It was that people who were making more network connections and who weren't happy and started connecting to happier people, then their level of happiness rose. So I mean, it's not just bad emotions that are contagious. It's also happy emotions. Yeah. And if you have in your circle a lot of happy people, that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, if I was your publisher and I was looking to try to make more money off of this, here's what I would do. I would take this book, Emotional, and I would take Subliminal and Elastic, and I would create this box set of the 3 books to sell at the holidays, right? Because it seems to me like you've written this trilogy that's all about human decision-making and behavior and all the things underpinning our actions that we don't even think about. Did you originally imagine that you were going to end up writing a series of books that go in that direction?
That's an interesting question. And I'm sure a lot of people would wonder, why is this guy who's a theoretical physicist writing about this topic? And
yeah.
What happened was I was back on the faculty at Caltech, and I had a good friend named Christoph Koch, a very eminent neuroscientist who studied consciousness. And I got really interested in consciousness through him. Mm-hmm. And he invited me to participate in his lab, which I did for several years, in all their research seminars and talks, reading their papers, reading many other papers. And I would sit in on courses. I mean, if you're in the faculty there, you can go to any course you want, just like a student can. I don't have to get graded either. So I would start going, I just got, I ate it up. It was amazing. And what I liked about it was it was the same curiosity I have as a physicist. As a physicist, I'm curious about the universe. How do we get here? How did it get here? Why is it the way it is? And then I have the same questions though as a human. How did I get the way I am? Why am I the way I am? How did we as a species get here? So I see that as kind of similar. And I tried to talk to Christoph about writing a book together. He didn't think it was a good idea to write about consciousness because he felt that that field was too much in its infancy and we didn't understand enough about it. But he said, why don't you look at the unconscious mind? And we talked about writing a book about that together. We ended up that I wrote it, but it was fascinating because the more I learned about it, the more I got interested in that topic, because I learned that a lot of what determines how you think, feel, believe, behave, it comes from processes that you're not aware of. I had written a book called The Drunkard's Walk. It's a math book, really, but it's about society. It's about how randomness rules your life, and it's about how we misinterpret a lot of the events of our life as coming from either skill or planning or whatever, and what a great role randomness plays, unrecognized role. And that had been my prior book, and now I'm going, wow, the unconscious is the same thing. There's something that people don't realize. They don't even know themselves that's governing all their thoughts and their actions, and so I had a great deal of fun in writing about that in that book, and putting in the latest. I was really interested in the latest neuroscience, the neuroimaging techniques, and all the amazing new technologies that were allowing this kind of advances to happen. And so I just put all that into that book, and it was great fun, and it was very popular. And after that, I decided that, along with these physically mathy books, I want to write more of these brain books, mind books, because I want to know about myself. So Elastic is about where ideas come from, how we get ideas, and where creativity comes from, and how we respond to change. I mentioned earlier reflexive thinking, that a lot of organisms can exist with this rule book of if this happens, do that. But they're vulnerable then to change when their habitat changes, something happens in the climate or whatever it is, that situations that hasn't been foreseen, they don't know, they don't react properly. And the elasticity in the brain allows you to be that adaptive. And I'm talking about all that and how that works. And when that was done, I was looking for, wondering if there was any other aspect to attack, and I realized I had missed something. And that was the emotional side. It's not all, emotions are just like the book on the unconscious mind, Subliminal. Emotions play a hidden role in our behavior. People don't appreciate or realize exactly the role that it plays, and how it's helpful, and how it can't be separated from rationality, and how you can control it when you need to. So that was just a kind of bam, bam, bam. It was a natural outgrowth, I think. And I have another good friend at Caltech, Ralph Adolphs, who in this book was as influential as Christoph was in Subliminal, because Ralph does emotion research. So, so it was.
That's very good.
I was lucky enough to be close to him, and again get a lot of good, getting steered right along the way too.
See, this is the thing about you, that you're so self-deprecating, and I'm sure if people will call you, you realize this too, that Len is very approachable. You're a very approachable guy, Len, and you make it sound easy. So you're a physicist, and you're thinking, you know what, I want to write about behavioral matters. I'm just going to make a right turn and do it. To me, that's like a dentist suddenly deciding that they want to be a brain surgeon. It doesn't happen, So where do you think you've drawn the confidence or developed the chops in order to go in an area that you didn't train for?
I think I got the confidence from my mother, and that I write about her a lot. I wrote about both of my parents. They had rather extreme experiences and dramatic experiences. They were Holocaust survivors, lost their family. My father had a wife and a child that he lost, in addition to siblings and his mother. And my mother had losses, and they went through some really wild, extreme experiences. And I had a very emotionally charged upbringing. But with a lot of different aspects and dramatic stories from those days. And so it seems like when I'm writing, I'm always looking for stories to tell, to illustrate my point, to make it more interesting. I don't want it to be a textbook. I want my books to be something you like to read, that has either drama or humor or interesting things in it that illustrate my points, rather than A to B to C kind of dry lecture. And so stuff always comes to my mind from my childhood, from my parents. And my mother, though, one thing that she was extraordinary in many ways, but she was amazingly supportive of everything that I did, and always telling me that I could do anything I wanted, and raising me in a way where I felt that I would never think of not succeeding. So I did so many crazy. I'm on the faculty as a physicist, which I quit because to become a Hollywood writer. I mean, I wanted to. And that's so crazy. I had no reason to believe that I could do it, because I didn't really have any other thing going for me than I thought I could. I always loved writing, and I loved movies. I wanted to do it, and I ended up writing for TV for about 8 years. For instance, MacGyver and Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then I went computer game from there, because Windows was coming online, and I said, wow, this is gonna be a lot cooler than these old text things we could do. Let's do that. And ended up eventually, I worked for Disney for a while. I ended up as an executive in New York. And then when 9/11 happened, we were unfortunately involved in 9/11, because I lived right there. And I won't get into that now, but we had to, because I had 2 young kids, we decided to leave New York. And so again, I just quit my job and said, I'm going to write nonfiction books now. And I had one that I had written on the side, but it didn't seem any particular promise that I would be able to make a living writing. And yet I just left New York, bought a house in LA, and been doing that. So this is all crazy. But I think when I think about my feeling that I can do these things, I just think back to my childhood, and I was lucky to have a parent like that. And I mean, my father too, I don't mean to diminish him. I saw a lot more of my mother than my father, because we were very poor and he worked constantly. But I think I just grew up with that feeling like I could do that. And if it didn't work out, I'd still find something. I mean, thinking back, of course, I remember this happens too, to what my parents went through. Whatever happens to me, it's not going to be 1/10 as bad as that. So I'm not worried about surviving.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking too, like you have such a good ear in your writing. You have such a good sense of audience, and you're able to make these very nice turns of phrase that are, funny. And if anyone goes on Len's LinkedIn account, you'll see people commenting on his different books and things, and the things that he says. And it's very prevalent in all of your work. And I was just wondering too, if the writing for TV also kind of trained you to be a little more sensitive to a popular general audience than your academic training gave you.
Oh, yeah, totally. So that's, and also a sense of pacing. It was really great training, writing for TV. We had back then, the shows I wrote for, we all had commercials, right? So they weren't all not quite the way we do it today with streaming. And so you had to pace it. You had to hit a certain high point or a funny point at a certain time, if it was a comedy, before the commercial. And I find that helped a lot. And and it also helps that I find that sometimes I might have trouble understanding something, and so I can understand people having trouble understanding things. And so when I'm writing, it helps me write more clearly. And maybe if I was too smart, that wouldn't work. So.
Well, all right. I want to play a quick game with you, inspired by someone my wife and I enjoy watching on Bravo, a guy named Andy Cohen. I don't know if you don't know him, don't worry. It's totally fine. This is a little game called Plead the Fifth. Okay.
All right.
I'm going to give you 2 choices, and you tell me the one that you prefer. And if you don't want to choose either one, you just say, I plead the fifth. And it's typically a drinking game. So if there's anybody, in the East who's drinking their cocktails right now, anytime Len pleads the fifth, you take a sip of your beverage of choice. All right.
Well, I might just plead the fifth just for that. But I wish I would have known that. I wouldn't have had coffee. I would have had something else here, but
I'm sorry. I should have let you know, next time I will. All right. So this is very simple. All right. Plead the fifth. I'm going to give you two choices. Cigar or pipe?
cigar.
Yeah, naturally. Computer or pen and yellow notepad?
Computer. Geez.
So you're not a writer on pads of paper.
Oh, trust me, I'm unfortunately old enough to have started that way, and I can attest to the fact that it's a hell of a lot easier with a computer. And I'm an incessant editor too, and I'm moving things, and I'm cutting and pasting, and you can only imagine what my yellow pads used to look like when before there was a computer. So totally, I would not be able to write anything near the books I write now, which go through my own heavy editing, repeated, not just to get it to sound better, but to make it clearer and to make it more logical or more entertaining. And I just kill myself doing it. Whatever I write, it doesn't come just come through the fingers onto the page. So no way a yellow pad. Sorry.
All right, computer. All right, next one. This one I'm really curious about. Captain Kirk or Captain Picard?
Oh my God. That's a tough one.
Wow,
acting wise, definitely well, I won't even, oops, I caught myself. I'd better not say that either.
Are you going to plead the fifth?
No, I think I'm going to say that I can't really choose. They each have their own aspects that I appreciate. So I guess I'll say, since I can't choose, I'll go have a drink. I'll plead the fifth.
All right, everybody out there, take a sip. All right, so my next question was connected to that. William Shatner or Chris Pine?
Oh, wow. I guess I would say William Shatner. I mean, I have to say that there's a certain William Shatner affection, because that Star Trek, the initial Star Trek was when I was a kid and growing up. And so in terms of the emotional connection, that's there.
That's the one. Okay. All right. That's good. Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
Star Wars.
All right.
Well, the books are amazing of Lord of the Rings. Okay. So if the books were allowed, I would take Lord of the Rings. But if you're talking about the movies, I would take Star Wars.
Okay. All right. All right. People have only had one sip of their beverage so far.
I know, as a writer, you have to be open. So,
well, I mean, that's really good, because some writers aren't. They're very narrow and very, specific. Isaac Asimov or Carl Sagan, both early popularizers of science.
Oh, Isaac Asimov.
Ah, okay. All right, this next one, I think you might not like me for doing. Neil deGrasse Tyson or Steven Pinker?
Fifth Amendment. Fifth. I'll take the fifth
on that one.
As soon as you said Neil, I'll take the fifth. You can ask me about Carl Sagan versus Isaac Asimov. Now we're talking current stuff. Yeah.
Everybody take a sip. And my final question, I think I know which answer it'll be. I don't know. MIT or Caltech?
Caltech.
All right. Yeah.
And my favorite teacher at Caltech was one that says on the front MIT, and it says, because I didn't get into Caltech.
Oh wow, that's cool.
But again, that's just when I say that, I don't mean to imply that I've made that's based on any analysis or feelings about their contributions, just about where I had a home versus where I never have had a home. So I feel more at home at Caltech and in Southern California. So sure. Well, but to all you people out in Boston, hey, come visit us. You won't go back.
We're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you too. I mean, tell people, is it fair to say that if your book Euclid's Window had not had that title, that you and Stephen Hawking would have never met? That
could be. So I should say why.
Yeah.
So I wrote 2 books with Stephen Hawking. Briefer History of Time, which was meant to be, he wanted to write something that was like a brief history of time, but clearer. And then I approached him after that, because I thought that first one was fun, about writing about his recent work. And that's what became the book, The Grand Design, because Universe in a Nutshell, Brief History. That was all about stuff he had done in the 70s and early 80s. And he had done a lot more interesting stuff. And so we did that. But how we got in contact was he read that book, Euclid's Window, presumably attracted by the title. Also a book, I wrote my second book, Feynman's Rainbow, and he was looking for someone to write with. And he wanted someone with a sense of humor and somebody who most of all understood physics. And he saw those books, and I guess he liked that. And he had his people contacted my people. His assistant contacted my agent and asked if I wanted to write with him. And of course, I was thrilled to do that. And so that turned into those books and a friendship that lasted for many years.
When you got the news that he had passed away, he hadn't been well for a little while, right? But it's still.
Well, he hadn't been well for 50 years.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, he periodically especially in the later years, the last 10, 20 years, I mean, he had serious ailments at least once a year or twice a year, lung infections in particular. But then, as he started to reach, get 70 and get older, he was weaker and weaker and less able to rebound.
And I wanted to ask you too, because it's a good way of also talking about the writing process with everything. You were still dealing with your grief over hearing that he had passed away, and the New York Times suddenly calls and says, "We want you to write a tribute talking about what Stephen Hawking means to you." You had to cope with a lot of your emotions then, to meet the deadline, right? I mean, what was that experience like for you, and how did you get the writing done under pressure like that?
Well, I don't think pressure and a deadline is good for the creative process, because you don't, when you create, one of the things I wrote about in Elastic is how you have a lot of ideas come into your mind on a subconscious level, and associations and ideas, and they don't reach your consciousness. And you have filters in your brain that take out the less conventional ideas and tend to promote to your consciousness the ideas that are more tried and true. That makes a lot of sense, but you don't get innovative that way. You don't get experimental. So you need to relax and loosen up. And having a deadline is bad for that, because it puts your brain in a more focused mode of, if you think I got to get this done, you tend not to. Let me try this that I've never tried before. So anyway, read Elastic about that, but that is very, very bad. So it makes it tough. But all I did for that article, in a way, it was easy to write, because they wanted a tribute based on my relationship and how I felt about him and as a friend. And so I just kind of sat there and felt my emotions and let it all come to me, and would just start writing like crazy my thoughts. I had thoughts, and I would just let it all pour in, feelings, thoughts, memories, incidents that happened, anything. And I didn't worry about at this stage about making it into a coherent article. I just put it all out there. And I don't remember exactly how long I did that for, but I did that. And I think I only had a couple of days to write the article. And then when it was done, I looked at it, and I may have even put them each one on an index card or something, and then played solitaire. So what order can I put these in? What leads to what? I'm pretty good at that, I have to say. That's one thing that I find that I'm in my writing, that I tend to be, that's good, because I have a way of being able to put together things that seem like they're separate. Because in my books, I'm constantly running into, okay, I said this, but this is not an encyclopedia. I said this, and now I'm saying that, and there's no connection between this and that. We're just saying, and now for something completely different every few pages. I don't want to do that. I want it to be coherent with some momentum moving. And I found that I've learned over the years to do that. And so anyway, I did that, and I shaped it, and then I expand, and then I polish and edit and send it, I guess, to, I think, Jamie Ryerson, and I don't know if I did another draft or not, but yeah, I made it. And, it came from the heart. So again, I find that being open, I tell a lot of personal stories in my books, and a lot of them are very emotional. Sometimes it's hard even to talk about them without getting emotional.
Of course.
And I found, though, that's that's why I think how you should write, and not just when you're writing, let's say, fiction, but if you're writing nonfiction. I try to write things that people can relate to and are related to their lives and have meaning for them in their own lives, even if it's physics. So,
And you don't sit there and do the old grammar school lesson of, I have my outline, Roman numeral 1, 2.
oh, I hate that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
no, oh.
Yeah, no, I don't like it either.
Oh.
Is that how you tackle your books then as well? Do you take this topic and sort of let it flow for a while and then?
Yeah, I'll look at the topic. I'll study the literature and the topic in this broad, open context, or as I try to have as few preconceived notions about what it's important or it's about or what's interesting, and just sit there. And I mean, I can spend months just exploring every different direction. It's the internet age. I can do that. I couldn't write these books like that at least 30 years ago, but I'll go on to the academic websites like Google Scholar, and you can follow academic papers, and you can see who they cite and who cited them, and you can just explore that way and explore the field. And then my mind has this huge universe of stuff in it, and then comes this period of trying to figure out what's important and interesting in where we're going and all that. And hopefully I view it like a fog that then condenses into some droplets that are chapters, right? Okay. So then I'll go, okay, I got 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever, 12 chapters, whatever the important parts are. And then I'll go, what is each chapter really about, and how do they tie together? And when I get to that point, I send it to Edward, my editor, Edward Kastenmeier, and I say, oh, here's my proposal. I want to write about this. Here's, and then, so the whole thing could be 3 pages. And then when I write about it, I'm totally free to not do that. So I want to be creative, and I want it to be fresh. So I don't want to feel like that's an outline I have to stick to. If I find that this chapter is really 2 different ideas, or maybe it becomes 2 chapters, or maybe I decide this is not interesting. Maybe it's kind of important, but not interesting. So I'll subordinate it and make it a section of another chapter, or try and get rid of it somewhere. I feel I have to say it, but it's not that interesting, so let me do that to it. Or it's not that important, I should just ditch it in the first place. Or oh my God, I missed this, or I missed that. Then I'll add a chapter, and I'll go, this chapter should be after that chapter instead of, it just changes and morphs. But
well, I was going to say, I mean, that's why your books definitely do have this organic feel when reading, that things progress more naturally than, there's some other writers who are just very rigid and stiff about the way that they organize things. And it's definitely not the case with you. As we're rounding it off here, Len, and Benjamin has been putting in the chat a place where people can go to, buy this lovely book and spend some time thinking about it. Have you ever thought in the big picture about the Wikipedia comment about you and about what your goal was as a writer? Have you ever thought of your bigger overarching goal of what you've hoped to achieve with your books?
No, I mean, I don't. I do for each book has the same thing. I wouldn't say that I have I wouldn't say that I'm trying to fill in a certain, fulfill a certain goal with the body of my books, but they're all really the same about what I said earlier, understanding where the universe came from, how we got it, why it's the way it is, and the same with people. Where did our species come from? How do we get the way we are? What makes me tick? Why am I the way I am? And what is that even how I am? So I think for the most part, that's my theme. But it's not that I consciously, that's what I'm interested in. It's not that I'm saying, here's my life's goal, and I'm going to, fill it in with books A through Z,
Yeah. Right.
Like Sue Grafton.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's a good gimmick,
Yeah.
For my recommendation to folks is your memoir about Stephen Hawking. It's just, It's lovely. It's so compassionate, and there's such a novelist's eyes for detail there. That's definitely worth people checking out. New York Times said very nicely about Emotional. They call this this book a stimulating new book that shrewdly considers the ways emotions influence our thinking, with compelling examples and attention to the latest research. So you've had some quite nice reactions out there thus far.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm fortunate to have had that.
And I mean, on that note, Benjamin, I think we're at the end here. We turn it over to you. We could
Thanks
go on, you know.
Thanks for a great conversation, Nick.
My pleasure, as always.
As always. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you both for this fantastic conversation. Thanks to all of you out there for spending part of your evening with us. Please learn more about this fascinating book and purchase Emotional at harvard.com. I put the link in the chat a couple times. On behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, all here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a good night, keep reading, and be well. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.